with presentation, people are going to say, Mark, just tone down the voice.
Oh, yeah.
I really can't do that. Folks, my name is Mark Freitas, and I know probably half of you in the room, you haven't been associated with me with Nevada SCATS, Nevada OSHA. I know some of you have been involved with my practitioner program. And remember, please sign in. Tatiana will give me a certification that you were here. You take my card, send me to my email, and I'll get you a letter of completion for this class. The first part of the class, we're going to be talking about the heat illness prevention program, coming from not the federal government, coming from the state of Nevada. We will talk. I'm not providing guidance. That's a Nevada enforcement term that I can't use. And when we're discussing this, we're going to make sure that it will be a discussion. The first part is going to be coming right from our presentation that we give to employers. So I'm not training you as an employee, I'm training you as an employer or an employer's representative so that you know what are the most recent updates to the Nevada heat regulation, especially after the federal government put out a compliance policy letter for the National Emphasis Program just this last month. While it came out in April, Nevada OSHA came out with a guidance letter that I will briefly cover. But I know a lot of the emphasis that people want to know is about, well, what the hell are we doing about smoke? Excuse my term. Got to remind me I'm being recorded. But the thing is we'll go through that as a discussion item. And that's why I always enjoy coming here. This is about fourth, fifth time that I've been coming here, talking to contractors representatives, basically of what the state is doing. But I want to always keep in mind, folks, I'm a trainer. I train safety, federal safety requirements, focus on state safety requirements. My credentials come from the University of California at San Diego, go Freitas, promoted to TI for my 30-hour construction and general industry to include the 10-hour. How many people are authorized to train? Okay. A suggestion here in Nevada, since Nevada has regulations dealing specifically with heat, and sometime in the future, we know it's just a matter of time when that bill about smoke will turn into a regulation. Start thinking about 30-minute, 1-hour presentations, primarily geared to the supervisors, but maybe incorporate them within your 10. That's going to be some of the suggestions that I will be presenting through there. So basically, I want you to get a feel for my point of contact information. Please take advantage of pulling the card. Has my email, has my address. Take advantage of what I call the resource listing. Anytime that I give form lessons in my classroom and even out of the classroom, I'll always provide a resource listing that will show our websites that in this case are when I'm pulling a lot of this information from. A lot of the information is going to be coming from OSHA. A lot of it is going to be coming from NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, from the CDC. A lot of it's going to be coming from Nevada OSHA. What comes from Nevada OSHA, primarily for those that are involved here in the state of Nevada, take a look at those guidance letters for what we call follow-on links to information. Because a lot of those links are going to be providing you checklists so that you, as either the employer's rep or representing employer's initiative to deal with these regulations, or one for now, but maybe a future one, because that's basically what Nevada enforcement will be using when they come to visit on the site. Where is your written workplace safety program? Where are the documents that show people have been trained, and just not the employees, but your supervisors? What type of training are you providing at the executive level, the owner? Because in the past, it was just one type of training for all, no more. You need to be getting a little bit more specific in the areas of responsibility. Since I am an employee of the safety consultation and training, please allow me to give this 2-minute song and dance to represent what we do. The brochures here are free. Also in the offing, the Bible. Everyone says, Mark, I really don't need that big book. I can go online. The beauty about our books is that the first part is all about Nevada. The first part will list Nevada revised statutes and the administrative codes. The thing about this issue, it talks about heat. It provides you with the Nevada OSHA guidance letter so that you not only can see, well, the federal government says nothing about heat in the standard, federal standard, but you'll see it here in the Nevada revised statutes in the laws. I will leave these here, either leave them with the institution or leave it with LP insurance. So you can use them, you can hand them out, but that's the benefit coming to us. Basically, that's who I am. A lot of you have seen this before. I grew up in Yarrington. I left Yarrington, joined the Marines, came back to Reno in 2010. I didn't recognize Reno, so I said, hell, I got to live up in Virginia City Highlands just to get used to the change of the roads and everything else. In fact, lived up there, wish I could have stayed up there, but the VA wouldn't approve any of the homes I was looking at because it didn't pass codes for some reason. I take nothing away against Story County and how they were doing business back during the surge, but when the VA inspectors came to task three times they didn't pass. A lot of it was dealing with water, but that's okay. I moved back down into civilization, been bouncing around, so now I live in Carson City. Yarrington set a certain tone for me, so that's why I live in Carson City. I've been with SCATS ever since 2017. I did take a year break to go to North Carolina because that's where my wife's from. Fortunately, she got tired of it. I was always tired of it. So we got to move back home. Nothing against North Carolina, go Tar Heels. But the thing is I'm back here. I like what I do. I train. I train with the passion. The reason why I train with the passion because of what I've done, even when I was in the Marine Corps. When I was out of the Marine Corps, I take a look at people. I don't want to see them get hurt. I take a look at what they do. And if it's not a safe work practice, I want to try to get them to change. Because the longer that you're in the business of safety, and especially when we're talking about things, not just in the construction trades, but the general industry trades, you're going to see it all. And when I think I see it all, I go out with my consultants and I'm seeing things that, good grief, never assume common sense applies. It never does. It's always going to be the right sense. What do? We provide that help, training. We provide the consultants. We provide the support. We provide the literature. We take a look at offering industrial hygienists. I know some of you have dealt with ours here in the Reno office. We're talking about John and Derek. They've been there for, well, not forever, but they've been there and they come with a lot of credentials. And what we're going to be talking about, the industrial hygienist element is really going to be heavy in the play of the game. When we're talking about a plan, when we're talking about a living plan that's just not going on the shelf, And people are going to forget about him until you have somebody go down, and we're not going to be able to revive him because he died of a heat stroke. So that's why we are targeting, especially with the oncoming summer, a lot of training. My recommendation, if you've never taken our heat illness prevention online training, it's a 3-hour class. Go online, Nevada SCATS, bring up training, register for the class. We take 100 people in. We already have 75. So to at least go through that package and take some of the information, and especially if it can help, like I said to my fellow OSHA outreach trainers, to help augment what the training is. Because our heat illness prevention program is totally dedicated to Nevada. And that's the other focus. A lot of times, a lot of our programs are going to be generic. That's why we say focus not only to the employer, but to the employees and to the hazards that are going to be in the play. Our website, we're always trying to give out information for what we can do. Take advantage. I know 2 of you have already been involved with our safety practitioners class. Keep up with them. What a better way to be certified by the state of Nevada that you've gone through a curriculum of 27 classes. That would include possibly an OSHA 10 or an OSHA 30 card, including the most recent updates to the Nevada regulations, and coming soon, the proposed regulation dealing with smoke. And that's why we always say, for those of you that have already have our certification, come back for a renewal. Things have changed. Okay, let me go on. Heat-related illness regulatory review. Note the designator, R. In the state of Nevada, that means what? That means it's already established by law, a regulation that is Nevada-centric. Everyone should know, for the safety professionals in here, that what happens if there is no federal regulation that basically says you as the employer did not provide the basic elements of heat illness prevention. How are they coming at you? General duty clause. What's the general duty clause? Number 1 commandment. Employer responsible to ensure all employees can survive, I'm putting my terms to it, based on the hazards that should have been recognized by the employer, relaying it to the employee to ensure that that employee is not going to be overtaken by the illness that could prompt an injury, or worst case, a fatality. 5A1. Nevada knew when this heat regulation was being considered by the federal government, watch the terms here, the federal government has had an ongoing rule process, taking in all the key stakeholders, the unions, the representatives, but it's going on now 4, 5, 6 years, because I was involved for the state of Nevada to be thinking about developing a training program. Because if you take a look at all the Nevada OSHA guidance letters, the bottom paragraph, they're going to say, if you have any questions or if you need assistance in the development of your plan, go to SCATS, Safety Consultation and Training. And depending upon the scope, it'll go from the consultants that we have here in Reno, Northern Nevada, or it's going to come to me as a trainer. And that's why we like to get ahead of the issue. The state likes to get ahead of the issue, because what we found out in the case of a heat regulation, federal government came out with those 2 key documents, the compliance policy letters that represents this national emphasis program regarding heat. But the last one that came out recognized 7 state programs that basically said these states don't have to come back within 60 days to see if they can comply with the compliance policy letter. Nevada was one of them because of that. But what did Nevada do? Nevada always keeping ahead, not saying we want to get ahead of the federal government, but ever since we've been doing this since 1973, when we put in to be a state plan state, we always wanted to get ahead because in this case, if we had a regulation in place, that means the federal government, they can come in with their guidance and direction, less a standard. But since we already have one, we already have a law. I'm not saying we tell them to take a hike. I mean, that's what I would say. But we will always respond with, we have a plan, we feel comfortable with it. But what Nevada does is when they get that guidance out to all employers, they let the employers know there is that plan. It is citing certain elements here, and this is what we're going to be doing. Let's just talk about this heat plant. It's already a regulation. The reason why, when I was talking to Tatiana here, I want to use this as a segue when we're suggesting things with smoke. All the adoption, when Nevada adopted this regulation, and when we got the legislature to enforce and establish the regulation, how we changed as other conditions were coming into play. And it starts from not just 24 when OSHA adopted it, I'm talking Nevada OSHA, I'm talking going all the way to 2021, when we started getting this indication that the heat regulation was going to be, quote, looked at the federal level. Nevada got involved with it, our legislatures got involved with it, basically saying, do we have to wait for the federal government to come out with policy in order that we're not always having to resort to what we call 5A1, which is the general duty clause for citation, or can we get a little bit more specific with the regulation that's really going to tie in? What do we expect the employers to do specifically? And that's why our regulations do that, especially the heat one. We have within the Nevada Revised Statutes, that's NRS, and the administrative codes, how we will conduct OSHA, Nevada OSHA business when looking at employers. We have required. Now, the sections that are noted at the top of this presentation come from the Nevada OSHA guidance letter, breaking it down in the sections so an employer can easily see how and where Nevada OSHA is going to be looking at your area to keep employees safe. So bear with me. I took portions. It's not going to go 1, 3, 2, but you might not see a 2. So bear with me. I took pieces of this so that I can incorporate other information when we're talking about smoke. Everyone should know, Nevada, the federal government does not require a written workplace safety program. The federal government does not. Everybody knew that. Unless you're involved with the development, the distributorship of hazardous materials, when we're talking about a term called process safety management, outside of that, here in Nevada, you have more than 10, you have to have a written workplace safety program. If you're dealing with explosives, I'm not talking small arms ammunition, I'm talking about maybe the development of charges for our mining. definitely one person involved with that. Whoever the employer is, you're going to have a written workplace safety program. Written workplace safety program is one of the key items of review when Nevada OSHA comes into your work site. If and when a situation developed where people got hurt, someone was killed, in this case because of a heat illness, first thing they're going to be looking at, boom, where's your written workplace safety program? Where's the annex, or where's the partition that basically is discussing this rule to have a segment related to heat illness prevention? If you don't have that, usually it's going downhill from there. But that's the key basis. That's why we always emphasize, do you know the written workplace safety program general requirements, but do you know them specifically to the hazards that come in? Definition of terms, heat illness. It's a condition, and it goes into different categories of illnesses. Does your written workplace safety program address that? My recommendation when I teach the class, Nevada's written workplace safety program, I have to teach it in a generic sense. I can provide examples of a written workplace safety program that consultants will use as a checklist when they go out to assist employers. Nevada OSHA will utilize that, but the first thing they're going to look at is site-specific, hazard-specific, employee-specific. So how do you incorporate the general into the specific? My recommendation, let that general written workplace safety program for your company be the umbrella. Utilize the appendices or an annex, however you break it down, but make sure that element is basically going to be addressed in your overall plan. Doesn't have to get to the point where it's going to feel like 50 pounds of paper. Keep it simple, keep it basic. And when it comes to how Nevada OSHA will come in, it's not the time for song and dance with big terms. They want to see white and black documentation. You can say, you can dance, show me the documentation, show me your plan, show me your training documents. When it comes to training documents, OSHA says, how long must the training be for those of you? Does it have to be an hour? Does it have to be 30 minutes? No. OSHA, federal OSHA, our OSHA recognizes a toolkit, a tailgate, a water fountain 15-minute presentation highlighting what are we doing today, what tools we're going to be using. Everybody's good to go, eyeballs, check in, sign. That being documented is considered documented training. And what does it do? It allows a Nevada OSHA official to at least see, at least we got the basic training down. And then it can go on beyond that. Certain things like that is what we always try to impress upon, not only our practitioners that are going to help the employers, but anyone else that comes into play. In your heat illness prevention program, do we discuss the risk factors associated with the overall hazard? At the employee level, at the supervisor level, at the executive level. Because if you're saying one type of training catches all, the answer is going to be not good enough. And again, we don't have to get scientific. We don't have to have degrees to basically understand. The key is recognize the risk factors, recognize the specific symptoms, because how are you going to provide first aid? if you don't know the requirements for each of those elements? Well, all we need to do is basically, well, throw him in a big bucket of ice, lower the body temperature, and he'll be good to go. Yeah, but that big bucket of ice is in the middle of the sun, and the individual is still bringing in that radiant heat. Is that really going to lower the body temperature? And depending upon the extent of where he is within those types of symptoms, what about that shock factor that's going to be able to come in? Usually a healthy body coming under some of those symptoms, being exposed to that immediate cooling element. 9 out of 10, you're okay, but you got to plan for that one. I grew up here in Nevada. I grew up in Yarrington, come to Reno, went all over the state, won't say the year, but it was at that time frame where high schools could have 200 people in the high school, and we'd come up here to Sparks and get beaten the hell out. But some of us were good enough to be able to go out and be considered for college football. Well, I was considered to go to South Carolina. Never been to South Carolina before. I grew up here in the Sierras, basically. And yeah, we used to go up to Lake Tahoe. That was a little heavy on the breath. But so we go out there. So the first time I'm showing up in Charleston, South Carolina on the 16th of August, it's already what they call double hundreds. What does that mean? 100 degree, 100% humidity. Let's not even talk about a heat index because we're out in an open field. And not only the heat coming down, but that grass was there. Boom. First thing we see, these big, huge tubs of ice. And I'm thinking, boy, I see all that Gatorade over there. I'm thinking, hey, we're pretty good here. And a couple of the individuals that I knew from upper South Carolina in that certain accent that I always appreciate, they said, cowboy, when you go down, we're going to strip you naked and you're going into that ice. I said, I make sure that never happens. But within 2 hours, we had a couple people from California, some running backs. Boom. They were going in there. They went down hard. We had a doctor always on the field to be able to check there. Insertion of a certain thermometer to make sure that temperature was going to be down. Yes, that was the wake-up call. And I said, well, I'll never do this again. Joined the Marines 6 years later. I'm in Parris Island, South Carolina, at the Buford, where it's a lot warmer. And we were doing that all over the place when I was supervising the training of recruits, the number of people. And we always had a game plan. We always had competent medical authority. We always had some way to cover. Unfortunately, we did lose some people. What does the employer have within the training plan, within the workplace safety program that will consider when someone can't even tell the difference between what about a stroke, what about exhaustion? Oh, we know what a rash is. Things to consider. First aid. Here in Nevada, well, depending upon where we're at, going up to Tahoe, and especially here in the higher Sierra, everyone says, well, Mark, it's just a dry heat. What's the worst thing about a dry heat compared to where I was down in other places in the world to where the humidity factor were double hundreds? You're dry. You don't have an indication for a sweat factor determination, which would give you indication of a hydration factor within inside you, so that everyone knows that you only drink when you get thirsty, right? I'm just trying to play into this, but what's the common thought? If you haven't been trained, and you're out there up on the roof, out there infernally, and you're trying to get that last 2 hours in, which means you get to sleep in the morning. and all of a sudden you didn't take your break. You didn't go into the shade. Everyone should associate. If you go into the shade, always drink. Dehydration, hydration, get the shade, lower the temperature. Now, is that common sense? Should be, but it needs to be the right sense for keeping people attuned to that. First aid is always going to be a factor. What do we do immediately? Someone goes down, someone gets a little bit dizzy. Well, tell the individual to go find shade. We're in the middle of the desert, Mark, what the hell? Key is, hey, find a shade spot. Cars right now, depending upon the time of the day. Yeah, the car or the truck might have some radiant heat or what's coming up from the ground, but at least get into the shade. Shade factor alone could be critical to lower that temperature enough to do what? Affect the body. This is all training. I know you know this. The key is, what about that brand new apprentice coming into the construction trades? End of this month, I'm going to a youth build program. People in that class are going to be 16 to 18. What's the minimum age for an OSHA 10 card in construction? There is none. It's left up to the instructor to make a determination. Is that individual capable of understanding what's being said? And then other approaches is having knowledge that they're going into. And they're doing a lot of it now, where school youth build programs are getting with construction contractors to help what we call start a foundation so that we can keep up with the demand of the construction trades, especially here in Nevada. But the onus is a 16, 18-year-old, because I remember when I was 16, how I made it to 17, thank God for small favors. But what about the safety that comes in there? And what am I getting at? Teach one of those teenagers the basics of first aid. And don't let, quote, it had to happen to me before I realized what I need to do to be the, quote, learn by hard knocks up against the head if you survive. That's why we emphasize that. Extreme cases. Yeah, okay, let's call 911. What about cell coverage? I had to do an OSHA 10 general industry between Fort Churchill, remember alternate 95, and then Highway 50. I had to go to the, quote, automotive test center. And I'm going up and above hills and everything else. I'm doing the OSHA 10 there, and I'm coming back. Brand new vehicle. My office manager, Luke Hendrickson, says, hey, Mark, I need to get some mileage on there. I said, Luke, I'm going to be dusting up that vehicle. He said, it'll be a good reason to go get it washed. I'm going in, bouncing all over the place. Halfway out, boom, tires going out, just blew out. There I am. Well, okay, all I have to do is what? I'm in a dead zone. So it's find a rock that would keep the jack from sinking down into the sand and then taking and wrestle with that 20-inch tire. Okay, think about that when you are 4 or 5 man crew, you're out there on the construction site. Are you always having cell phone coverage? Is it, quote, assumed? Or are we checking with that game plan? Remember, Nevada has the considerations indoors. Now, heat, indoors and outdoors are considerations. We're taking a look at all of the environmental impacts of heat based on other factors. Exertion factor, time doing a certain activity, location. And then, of course, yes, PPE. We always say PPE is the last resort. Water, rest, shade. What else can we do? Minimize the time. Take a look at other activities. What's the number one industry that's exposed to heat illness across the nation? Restaurant, food industry. Why is that? Because of the cooking, because of the quick movement, boom. Construction falls about 12 down. And when you take our class, if you do take that online class that I recommend, take a look at some of the charts. You'll get the nation chart. We will even get the chart from the state of Nevada showing how many complaints are coming in from workers based on their assessment of being exposed to heat. So we need to recognize what we're doing, what are the available, quote, controlling elements that can do that. I already talked about the requirement for a workplace safety program, clearly specified, Nevada revised statutes. If you are required to have a program, you must conduct what we call a job hazard analysis, sometimes referred to as a job safety analysis. If you do not have a job hazard analysis associated with a work practice, associated with the potential of a specific hazard, Nevada OSHA won't waste any more time. You don't have the required literature in order to support your heat illness prevention program, which makes your written workplace safety program ongoing. Basic things that need to be done. We give a class on how to conduct a job hazard analysis. Within our 3-hour class, we take you through a scenario on how to use the JHA for a heat-related hazard that comes into the play. Basic steps, select the task, you can read down the list. The key is keep the document, but don't get rid of it. Don't put it on the shelf. Utilize that for a, quote, review by your safety committee or your group. Know the steps and who's going to conduct that. That's the other, that job hazard analysis. Everyone says, well, it's only got to be the safety guy or maybe a supervisor here or there. We don't want to get too many other people involved because it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of effort if you know what you're supposed to do. And if you know what you're supposed to do, you won't have any substance to a JHA unless you're bringing in the person that's actually going to be what? Exposed to the hazard that you're trying to control, either by engineering, administrative, last resort PPE. That's another element of evaluation of your, quote, work plan. Who did you get involved to be able to make that determination? Boom. Get someone appointed to take care of each of these elements. Usually we say the workplace safety program, if it isn't going to be the employer, should be someone with the boss's approval to be able to maintain this administrative document. Depending upon the size of the company, that one person might be the lone ranger for everything, which puts a big burden. Hopefully that individual, that's the lone ranger, like me right now for the state, northern part of Nevada, I'm the only trainer. I'll do everything I can to get support. Hey, consultant, can you help me out here? IH, can you help me out here? Yeah, we're going to be talking about heat. Maybe you can basically sell what you can do for the employer to help emphasize the key points. But usually it's always going to be the safety person. When I used to work for Anheuser-Busch down in Florida when I left the service, who was the safety rep. Well, I had the title, but who was going to assist me? HR. Everything was dropping to HR. Well, it took us a while, but we were able to at least develop a team that we can depend upon to be able to do this business. Basic requirements within your plan. How do you, quote, explain when you're going off-site? Who is in charge of on-site heat illness prevention? Is it spelled out? Is there an individual who is knowledgeable to be able to address? Can he bring up his cell phone and get from, quote, a web heat index bank based on zip code? But you know darn well certain zip codes can cover, in this state, 250 square miles. So what are we going to be doing? Where is the provision within your written workplace safety program to be able to maintain that monitor? Yes, here in Reno, you're doing certain type of activities for a business, but what about your crew up there at Lake Tahoe? Lake Tahoe saying, hey, everything is great up here. It's below that 90-degree factor. We're good to go. Well, down here in Reno, it's 96. Who is going to be the person, you say man with the plan, but now the person with the plan that's going to be constantly monitoring that heat index, because that's another key factor within your plan. Lone workers. What do we do? What's going to be the provision? Well, just give them a cell phone, say, hey, you got to call in every 30 minutes. I already told you what happened to me. Number one, you better verify that you have that capability. And number two, if you don't have it, how are you going to augment this off-site monitor to make sure that you have, as the employer or the employer safety representative, a means to communicate? Again, what we recommend, what's been recommended by Nevada OSHA, because here in Nevada, and especially when we're talking to people from NV Energy and where they go, Lone Rangers, high elevation, dead spots out in the middle of nowhere, where is your plan to discuss how we keep up? Can we contact you to say, hey, based on our information, the heat index is this? They should be able to come back to you to say, hey, I'm not feeling too good. I thought I was hydrated and everything, but I need some help. How is that established? What we call the communication program. Other best practices. Takes discipline sometimes. And I'm the good example of that. 2x4. A little bit of pain to stimulate my brain, especially if my life depends upon it. Sometimes it shouldn't have to go that far. Section 7, boom, training, documented training, specific training that can be outlined within your plan. You don't have to have the whole plan, training plan outlined within that written workplace safety program, but you should have some references on how you're going to use it. Other measures within the section. Is the employer taking adequate measures to mitigate, reasonably mitigate, that heat illness coming into the play of the employee to where it's going to cause injury? Provisions. Remember, this is just a review. We are talking outdoor, we are talking indoor. But there are certain provisions relative to what you're saying up there. Climate controlled environments. Yeah, we can have a climate controlled warehouse and it's 100 degrees in there. what's going to be considered adequate based on the exposure to the person going in there, to where, yeah, you can go in there, but you're not going to stay in there for an hour. So that's where we get the industrial hygienist aspect to come in to be able to make that determination. But there are provisions regarding certain climate controls, certain motor vehicles, and other areas within that regulation. Boom. What do we do? Follow the plan. Is our plan understandable not only at the executive and supervisory level, but also at the employee level? And especially in a language, when English isn't the primary language. What's the percent of our workforce in construction and general industry that's Hispanic in the state of Nevada right now? It exceeds 35%. Fiscal year 2024, Bureau of Labor and Statistics, fatalities went down. We're still at 5,000. But what element of workers increased? Those where English is not the primary language, which tells you what? What's the communication? What's the training emphasis with workers, especially in our hazardous trades? Yes, construction is way up, but then there's others in the general industry trades. That's what we need to be looking at. And again, our Nevada OSHA recognizes labor union involvement. There's certain provisions that need to be looked at if you fall within that category. How are we going to be assigning it right now? Unprogrammed inspections. Every year, everybody knows Nevada or federal OSHA will give to Nevada OSHA all the dangerous, hazardous industries where there was an increase in injury and illness rates and a dark rate. Nevada will take that and bring up their program inspections. We just had a recent change, but you're always going to see asbestos at the top. You're going to see construction, but what's creeping up now? We're talking about that heat regulation. We're talking about warehouse. And granted, yes, we always have to go for what's going to get the attention, the complaints, the imminent danger. Not saying that fatality is taking a back seat, but in our heat regulation, it actually tells you by Dykes Code, North American Industrial Classification System, where they're going to target. And construction isn't at the bottom of the list. And especially the type of construction trade, when you're talking about roofing, when you're talking about other aspects like ground, highway, asphalt, concrete type work, you need to take a look at that listing and see where you fall. Granted, we had that OSHA instruction that comes out in 2022. After that came out, Nevada came out with a letter addressing how Nevada, with the development, knowing that we were getting a regulation coming in, how we were going to be doing business. Federal OSHA was targeting 80 and 85 degrees. Hell, that's a normal day in the springtime here sometimes. Nevada, another reason why we wanted to get ahead of the game is saying, hey, let's take a look at heat priority days. Let's utilize the weather service for these advisories that an employer is required to be in tune with in order to say, hey, when it gets to a certain heat level, here's the recommendation. Always provide water, rest, shade, but take other provisions for your new workers, the older workers, not general workers, because everyone is going to be different based on age and everything else. That was extended out to April of 2026. Within that document, these are what Nevada OSHA enforcement will look for. Where's that job hazard analysis? Especially if they are responding to an incident, a catastrophe, 3, 4, 5 people going into the hospital, boom. They're going to be asking, it's not for that job hazard analysis, but if it's going to be related to heat illness, they're going to be taking a look at what? Okay, that written workplace safety program. Let me see your training records. Let me see how we're communicating. If it's well off site with the common knowledge term again, that common knowledge of what is the heat index at that time of day. That's what they're going to be looking at. The basis of the checklist that Nevada OSHA will use is that. That's what we need to emphasize to our supervisors and to our executives. So what's happened here recently, within the last 3 months? Boom. Nevada OSHA says, yeah, we want to try and keep driving this rule-making process to hopefully we can get a standard developed. Nevada says, we're not waiting. It comes out 10 April, 21 May, they respond. They didn't have to respond. Because within that document, the federal document, it recognizes Nevada as one of 7 states that already has a plan. Nevada chose to respond to basically say, this is what we are going to be doing. Boom. They accepted that national emphasis program, but they say, keep term up there, in modified form. They will update the target industries. So that's why that document is crucial for employers to know, do you fall within that NICE code for consideration to be targeted? Do you have a plan, employer, to where it will meet how Nevada OSHA is going to evaluate your plan? You have access to Nevada OSHA's checklist. Now, granted, how easy can that apply for an employer to go down that checklist? Or do you need to have a Nevada OSHA enforcement official go down that checklist with you? All right, this is where I get up on the sales pitch, folks. Don't wait until Nevada OSHA comes to you. Seek out the individuals that are going to assist you. We come at no cost so that we can go through that checklist, especially when we're starting to see heat advisories starting to get elevated to where an employer really needs to be paying attention to the activities that are required to keep people safe. Any questions? I know that was quick, Chris.
Is there a chance that some of the, if the feds come with the program, requirements of the program, what would that do to the batters? Or they say, okay,
Meaning who blanks policy letter?
but if the feds actually adopted a policy, would state plans all?
No,
have to make it
no, because we, as a state plan, recognize state and state. There will definitely have to be a review. Just like when the CPL came out, and the CPL is citing a certain temperature, a certain heat index, the state plan was able to go back with our regulation to say, based on unique considerations, based on this. But that will be a good question, and I'll do a follow-up. I'll get back with you. If and when the federal statutes come out, will it affect an already established state plan that has a state law with how it is carrying out its provision?
So that might be an influence to the rest of us. Are all 7 state plans?
All 7 state plans. Talking, go up the coast, California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada,
Arizona, New Mexico.
Arizona, and then I think one of the Midwestern. Wisconsin, maybe, I'm not sure. But that's the thing. It recognizes, that CPL recognizes what the states have already established. But no, that's a good question. That'll be some good homework for me. So what happens when they do come out with that? Likewise, when they're talking about other things that state of Nevada's done. Key consideration also for those of you that are in this business. Here not too long ago, there was a couple incidents that happened that prompted Nevada OSHA to start taking a look at emergency eye wash shower. And it was primarily based on the number of injuries that employees were suffering, eye injuries. So we took a look at what the federal standard says about emergency eye wash showers. 1910.151. It's only this big on a big book. It's not that much. The key element where Nevada, again, I'm not saying we're getting ahead, but we're providing more information where that one statement that says that your emergency eye wash and shower capability must be suitable in order to meet the demands to help, for certain words, mitigating what that hazard might be. Nevada says we're looking at a statement, whereas one of the standards that has had American National Standard Institute standards going way back, that standard that should have been a consensus standard was never adopted by OSHA. That very vague, in my opinion, that vague assessment prompted Nevada to say, hey, we're taking the most recent ANSI standard on emergency eye wash. We're going to make a regulation citing that all employers will utilize 1910-151 as the guide, but to utilize this ANSI to determine suitability of the facilities. Key point for any of you that ever had an unfortunate incident when you're having to find where is that eye wash capability and you're supposed to be able to get to it within 10 seconds. And as you're stumbling around, you're supposed to be able to touch something, not actually have to turn for a couple minutes, but actually touch something to activate the water to flow up. Hands free. Why is the hands free? Which isn't spelled out in the 1910.151, because you're supposed to do this to allow the flow up there, which made a range of the key questions. I got that question just last week. Well, if I had a bottle that was going to be able to allow that much water to come in, to be able to flow, is that going to be suitable? Well, if you read the 1951, the 1910-151, it's just saying suitable. We don't have a consensus standard in the front of the 1910 or the 1926 to give you further. So the assumption is, God, how do we equate that? Yes. What is the determining factor of suitability? What did Nevada do? We're going to the most recent ANSI standard that will say hands-free, which means you can't use a bottle. The ANSI says 2 eye simultaneous water flow. What are they doing? Nevada OSHA now is using that standard, and it makes it a heck of a lot easier when they're going on to the site to do what? What is considered suitable. So, word to the wise, take a look, see when we're training our next class. It's not that long of a class, but it actually, what we say, reinforces an understanding how this state will utilize our federal regulations, which is our requirement, but that we have the option to have more strict applications by utilizing and updating ANSI standards. Everybody it takes forever and a day for OSHA.gov when reviewing the standards to incorporate an ANSI or an ATSM or an MFPA. I'm talking your common standards to be a consensus standard, which means it's in the front of the book that can be cited specifically. The ANSI standard won't be cited specifically, but it gives Nevada OSHA a means with knowledge of that standard to be aware for the employer to.
Is it hands-free activation or hands-free all the time?
No. Activation, what they call one movement activation. Okay. It could be by foot, it could be by knee, but one movement.
Okay.
Hands.
That's not how we were told.
Yeah. So
By enforcement.
when
Enforcement, I don't know, 6 months ago, she said that you cannot use your hand. You must use your foot. That was the IH enforcement.
okay,
She also said they must be every 50 feet.
it must be what?
They must be placed every 50 feet. So
They use 55 foot within a general setting that can't be obstructed. 10-second rule comes into the play. It's 10 seconds first, no more than 55. But anyone that has emergency eye wash or showers within their place of employment, that safety representative, I'm not saying they must. What we recommend have that updated ANSI available. And take a look at the sections, chapter 5.1 and 6.1, that discusses hands-free operation. I don't remember activation coming into that. And the only reason why I'm saying that is because I had to deal with a couple situations at renowned hospitals where they were trying to emphasize what is an alternative to having flow of water.
Right.
And all the applications.
Right. If I got guys on top of steel, I don't have a plumb eye wash station within 10 seconds. Right.
Well, where's the hazard? What's the hazard? What's the causative requirement of having that eye wash station there? That's one question that needs to be asked. If that individual is going to be doing something, and this is regardless if he's wearing PPE or not, that's specific to the new ANSI standard. Consideration is just because you have PPE on, and if you're doing an activity to where there's a potential of splash up, even with glasses, you don't consider that. So that's why the portable eye wash facility capabilities will come into play. And I know manufacturers, but that's where the ANSI now can look upon a manufacturer. They can't recommend, like OSHA, we can't recommend a company, we can't recommend a product. No one in the government can, other than NIOSH, who will approve filters and specific respirators. ANSI will utilize certain manufacturers in their explanation of suitable, but they say they are not endorsing, but to be able to utilize it. But see, again, and that's a key element. I'm not going to question how Nevada OSHA determined something wasn't in line. But my suggestion is definitely get a hold of that hands. If a company, if a business has those eye wash, emergency shower capabilities at a bottom line, get that hands and read through it, because they are very specific when it comes to hands-free within that document. But again, that's good homework. That's good homework for me when we're talking about activation.
Well, here's the thing is, my OSHA station at my shop, we get through CENTOS. It's supposed to meet the criteria, but in order to activate it, you gotta activate it by hand by dropping so you can get the flow. You know, it's like a trigger.
Well, and likewise, because I know within that ANSI standard, they authorize use of the hand to activate specifically. I remember this when I read through that document. Pulling the handle, you have to engage by hand the release of the water. If not by this means, either by foot. So that's why, I mean, like I said, it's not in my position to question what Nevada OSHA has done. My only professional response would be take a look at that ANSI. And if you have a question specific to this case, to what you bring up, I would call back here.
It was just, you know, it's just construction. It's very challenging to have a plumbed eye wash station within 50 feet.
Well, especially out in that.
I can tell you when I was out in the desert with an armor unit, and we were gonna be there for at least a week to 2 weeks, and we were dealing with some pretty caustic elements, especially when we're trying to do things with grease and the oils and the lubricants and some of the other things. Good old Uncle Sam brought up that little quote portable. The only problem with that is you always have to keep it in the shade. Because, and again, remember, DOD, we don't follow OSHA, but DOD, we follow similar requirements for safety. And that's the one thing here in construction, because even in the ANSI, when they're talking about portable facilities, they're also saying, remember, what does tepid mean in terms of how your eyes can adjust to water. You know, it can't be too high, it can't be too low. And they'll even go into the degrees of what tepid is. Lukewarm, well, what's lukewarm?
Actually, I know when I was in Iraq, everything fell under Cal OSHA standard, which was to include eye wash stations, water, anything.
Were you in the service or you were under contract?
Prior Navy, but I also worked for DOD as well.
Okay,
And when I was over anywhere in Iraq and Afghanistan, everything fell under Cal OSHA specification.
okay.
And when I worked down in San Diego doing ship construction and modernization, Cal OSHA even superseded NAVC standard.
Well, NAVC, again, this being a humble Marine having to contend with the sailors, I know NAVC used to work with, because how many naval stations and bases do we have in California? I know they will work with federal. Federal has its own umbrella, but depending upon how other contractors were coming into that federal site, I know there was certain types of communications and understandings of how people, but my question is this, were you in the service having to deal with
Oh,
a
yeah.
Cal OSHA standard? Okay,
Yeah, even when I was with Special Coach Unit, first Gulf War,
okay,
with regards to a lot of things that we did, it still fell under Cal OSHA standard, not NAVC
Okay.
standard.
okay. Because I remember when I was in Desert Storm, we were just lucky to have some type of a safety requirement to begin with, not alone.
Trust me, I was running up these grades.
Yeah. But no, I'll do the research, but especially this question, your question. as far as what happens when they regulate. Any other questions regarding heat? Thing that I want to recommend is keep up with the Division of Industrial Relations. Keep up with Nevada OSHA, keep up with Nevada SCATS websites. Take advantage of that resource list that Tatiana will provide electronically, because every one of those documents will also have a reference list that can be used. We good? Yes, ma'am.
We also do work in California, just over the border. If we had a situation happen that happened in California, does it fall under their regulations or Nevada?
The state that you're working in is going to be the state that the employer needs to recognize their regulations.
So you can carry two robots.
So, no, that's a good question, because that comes up all the time. Well, Nevada requires this, does California? Well, you gotta go to California to see certain things, just like I'm going through my second certification to teach OSHA 10s, right? I can teach OSHA 10s until I'm blue in the face here in the state of Nevada. What do I got to do to teach an OSHA 10 in the state of California? I got to go back to UCSD, go Tritons, and pick up additional training to be able to teach to Cal OSHA standards. So hopefully when I do decide to retire, like that. Okay. If there are any other questions, let's go ahead and discuss smoke. I'm going to say it again for the case of sake of recording. This is a discussion. I am not privy to give any type of guidance. Guidance is a Nevada OSHA term. Providing guidance is direction that is to be taken. What I'm going to discuss is a new bill that is coming into what we call the play of Nevada, and what considerations we together as safety professionals should be looking at. It is only a bill. Oh, by the way, anyone recognize this? That's downtown Reno. And that was on a good day. Back when we had what we call the California influx of some of the smoke, and when the weather conditions weren't allowed. That compared to what was going on in Carson, because everyone needs, if you've lived here long enough, you know, you could have no wind here in Reno, go through Washoe Valley, and truckloads are just going back and forth, and then you're dropping into Carson City, and there's snow and there's rain. Something about these Sierras that really can temper it, how the smoke comes in. I need to say right now, there is no review. It is only a bill. We're looking at elements that are, for everyone's information available. We're looking at the Senate Bill 260. What does it say? The bill is suggesting that regulations be established for employers to do what? All of this is coming word for word out of the bill.
So it says effective January 1st.
That's
doesn't
when
necessarily mean
the bill was signed off by the governor after it went through legislative process that previous summer. But hear me out. I think I know where you're going.
Okay.
All right. So that bill signed off by the governor is basically serving notice that the legislature is considering regulations for employers to do what? That. That's coming directly from the bill. Who is being given the task to develop those regulations that will require the guidance in order for the employer, if it does become a regulation, to do that? That is my leadership. I work for safety consultation and training, safety council and training, working with other agencies to include Nevada OSHA. We work under the Division of Industrial Relations, under the Department of Business and Industry. That division, our chief administrative officer, is now working with a group of what we call key stakeholders within the state, to include union representatives, to include other agencies' experts, to consider how an employer is going to be expected to do that. Question?
Well, since it passed here and the governor has signed it, does that then really open the door for the enforcement to cite easier under General Fund because it's been signed, or is it still gonna?
Without a regulation coming into play, my understanding, Nevada enforcement will continue to utilize the general duty clause, holding that employer accountable for a known hazard within that employer's scope of responsibility.
So if we're following what we know at this point, we're probably relatively safe.
Right. So the key is what Nevada is hoping to do, my understanding, is to get to the point where, like the heat, whereas in the past, Nevada OSHA only utilized 581. Now they're using specifically the regulation, citing areas of that. In this case, it appears that's what the expected outcome to do. But again, this is discussion based on information that we have. It's the Division of Industrial Relations. Our Chief Administrative Officer is being tasked to take a look at what regulations can be developed in order to meet the objectives of the bill. That's why right now they've had meetings. There have been a lot of teams meetings, bringing in a lot of interested parties. And right now the bill is at what we call the LCB. The Legislative Council Bureau. What do? They take a look at what is being submitted. They take a look at certain legal obligations to lawyers to see if it's going to meet not only the legal requirements, but to be able to be put into a regulation format. Now, when I say that, that's why I strongly recommend when that comes out, a determination is going to be made to serve what we call 30-day notification, where the words coming out saying the proposed regulation, number yet to be determined, is going to be out for review. That's within our Nevada legislative process. There'll be 30 days where the interested parties can take a look at it. They can make comment on it. There'll be a final meeting, and then boom, it's going to go out. Folks, that's where it's at right now. And I am not privy to go on beyond discussion regarding that process, other than keep up with the website. Go to Nevada Division of Industrial Relations. Go to a recent podcast that just happened last week to where our chief administrative officer explained not only what Nevada OSHA and Nevada SCATS and mechanical do, but there's a portion about midway through that discusses this very process regarding smoke and what to anticipate and a better process. Okay,
So the word effective doesn't mean enforceable.
say again.
The word effective in January doesn't mean enforceable.
Effective bill prompting the division to take action to develop the regulations.
Under those guidelines.
Yeah, under the bill's guidance. For where we're going to be taking a look at things like this. When you take a look at AQI, I am not an industrial hygienist. I have a hard enough time just remembering basic acronyms when I was in the service, but trying to deal with these, you'll see it's written there. 150, 200, who regulates air quality index? Usually it's going to be affiliated with charts that come from the EPA. And they'll break it down into categories. 0 to 50 might be safe, 50 to 100, not good for what we call sensitive populations, and then it's going down. Within that bill, it will mention, just like when the heat regulation was coming into play, they wanted to say, how does an employer keep up with a heat index? What do they recommend? Downloading certain applications that would allow you to put in a zip code and it would bring up just not the weather, but a heat index, so that at least that employer at that moment of time could basically see, well, where are we within the realm? And then Nevada, when you take our 3-hour class, really get into the details. What do we do when we get a heat advisory and warnings? And what are the actions that Nevada OSHA is expecting the employer to adhere to? So what am I thinking? Heat index, heat regulation, AQI, smoke regulation. Key definitions within that regulation. What are they looking at? This one is specific. We're not looking indoors yet in terms of how the bill is written. All right. That's why this is a caveat. We're looking at outdoors. We're looking at a work environment outdoors. And now we're going to be looking at performance of critical traffic. Key definitions that are within the bill. These key definitions, you would think, are going to work their way into a regulation. Maybe, maybe not. Definition of, is your employee constantly or frequently or occasionally? Employer requirements. Now, don't think smoke. Take out air quality monitoring and think heat index monitoring. Now, what do you have? The minimum requirements that were being looked at while we were developing the heat regulation. What are we doing? Another approach. Mitigation and monitoring. Written safety plans specifically to smoke. Air quality monitoring, using an air quality index. How do we maintain constant situational awareness of an AQI? That bill recommends utilizing a EPA air map. Same routine, gives you the quality, utilizing the EPA charts. 0 to 50, 50 to 100, 101 going up and down the list. Training specifically to, what do we look for when someone is being overtaken by heat? Coughing, gagging, unconsciousness. When it gets to the point where it's pains in the chest, what are we going to do for that? Training, just not to recognize, training for first aid, training to report, having suitable communication systems. Exemptions, as the bill is written right now, who's going to be exempt? Yes.
Because I'm this guy, I don't want to be this guy, but employs a commercial truck driver. I got, let's say, I don't know, we'll just some outfit out there that has one commercial truck driver. Is his entire company going to be not under this regulation because he has one commercial truck driver?
Bottom line,
Have to know.
Oh, so all together, not one or the other, all of the above. Simple. Thank you.
now, you raise a good issue. We have how many independent truckers out there? But just like the regulation for heat, it has those provisions for motor vehicles. As long as the motor vehicles have a condition. Because they even break it down in the heat regulation. If someone operating a vehicle, like my old vehicle, hopefully it'll be replaced by the time I die in 10 years. The thing, nothing against it. But the thing is if an employee says, hey, I can't get that cold enough, it won't let it go below 72. Is that going to be means for an employer to have to take action against that? It's very clear within the heat regulation. The answer is no.
I get my thing here though, if it says employs commercial truck drivers and I gotta, this is going to like Freitas construction, who we know has commercial truck drivers, but they also do other construction work. They employ commercial truck drivers and they exempt from the regulation.
Depending upon the number,
Right.
under the employer accountable for the safety of the individual. And again, that will pose questions that will be reiterated, just like when the heat regulation came out, that specific question, not to that same context, was explained within the OSHA, Nevada OSHA guidance to be able to do that. And see, what I don't want to suggest, everything that I can answer will be done by Nevada OSHA guidance. That, I don't want that to be even considered. I'm just talking in reference to having seen how a regulation took place regarding an environmental hazard, how this might follow suit. Okay. So this is a discussion for a way in. All right. Look how the heat illness prevention plan and regulation came about. Utilize from what Tatiana is going to give you to see how Nevada OSHA guidance helped drive the specific requirements upon employers. Start looking at affected employees. Initiate in terms of a generic plan, awaiting further definition. The key is always going to be, have you identified, this isn't in your heat, workplace safety program, have you identified the employees who are going to be subject to the potential of the hazard? I'm not saying you have to do it by name, but by position to be able to take it to the next step. Do a job hazard analysis of what tasks that are going to be outdoors that might be subject to an air quality index that might prompt certain activities. I'm saying could prompt. I don't know what those standards are. Training requirements, just not at the effective employee. Supervisory training that we had to emphasize when we developed training. What should the supervisor know? Well, yeah, that guy, number one, needs to know what the boss wants to do. And then he or she, they need to know all of the written workplace safety requirements that the boss, after signing off on it, is imposing upon his supervisor responsibilities for those that are below. We're talking first aid, we're talking training, we're talking communication systems, having knowledge of what is an AQI. For a suggestion. How do we do that? Do we allow the employee out there on the site to keep track? Doesn't cost anything to download that EPA Air Now app.
Oh, but the trouble with that is you've only got 2 or 3 monitors around town. If like these guys are, like you say, in Fernley and the meters in Carson, that's not doing these guys any good at all. So that,
Again,
yeah. Just,
again, consideration of an employer. And that's going to be the consideration of what is, you would think, is going to be discussed once and when a regulation will stipulate how do we do that, if we're required to do that. But having looked at 2 plants, Oregon, California, wild smoke prevention plans that are actual laws, get familiar with AQI. So when we think about smoke, when we think about all that we said, what should be one last consideration? And in my opinion, is really going to have a lot of discussion. Appendix D. If an employer is going to require an individual to wear an NH95, boom, you have to have respiratory protection program. If he's or she's going to be required to wear that respirator, you need to have a medical evaluation. If you pass the medical evaluation, boom, it needs to be fit tested. So up to a certain point, when I look at California and I look at Oregon, California says if that AQI is above 500, and if an employer is exposing an employee to work in that condition, no choice, respirator. That's why, if you remember in the beginning of this smoke discussion, there was that line that basically said, what is the AQI that will prevent work from happening? And that's probably going to be with or without that respirator. Needs to be very close, but again, everyone is thinking about smoke, but then we're all thinking about, in this case, well, we're supposed to be doing a job hazard analysis, right? And that job hazard analysis, if we can't engineer it out, if we can't administratively control it, it's going to lead to PPE. But in this case, outside of what we were encountering with the heat regulation, what does smoke inhalation deal with but this? So this will be what I believe a real interesting project for how we're going to mandate regulations for the employer. So that's why I'm saying employers need to get familiar, like what we had to have to do with the heat index. Now we're going to have to do with the air quality. And folks, I'm sorry, that's the limit of what I can discuss. So are there any other discussions?
Is there,
Here's what does smoke have to do with the heat index, because we could have those same conditions at 65, 70 degrees and still be smoky. Or like I've experienced in Alaska, and during winter time, it could be sub-freezing, and because the gas up there, it harnesses all the pollutants, causing the air quality index to go down the tubes.
Right.
Or as you know, in the Middle East, that air quality index is not even governed by heat there. It could be any time of year. With anything.
Sometimes you're gonna have to consider those two hazards together. No question. Yeah, I remember the first time I experienced in Iraq was the coldest part of the year in January. And when that wall of sand just came all over us, based on the weather and no wind, it stayed with us for 2 weeks.
Like talking about.
Exactly. And yet the old t-shirt above there is how we went through. Again, how will the individual hazard of smoke be addressed? How other factors could imply other considerations is yet to be determined. So that's why I'm saying things that I would do is start taking a look at, if you want to get ahead, depending upon your position. A lot of the times right now, we're telling all our employers right now, we need to weigh down. Because as safety professionals, we don't have a choice. We have to think ahead. Well, something tells us something's coming. Well, we had the governor signed off on it 1 January. And from what we're reading in the bill, what's coming about? What is the anticipation of what's going to be coming to us? So that's why there's very strong reluctance to get beyond what we call just a discussion level. Because when it gets to the rule and the regulation, you saw it up there. The director is required to have Nevada OSHA enforcement provide guidance letters setting up the time frame from when enforcement will take place and the regulations and the requirements that must be taken now to do. And all of their guidance letters are always going to say, if you have questions, contact my office.
So going forward for this year, since it's not regulatory yet, do you have recommendations just to make sure we don't get a general duty clause? Should we be just educating and actually writing these plans and trying to implement something now?
No. My recommendation is use the information for food for thought.
Okay.
90 days, usually. And the only reason why I'm saying 90 days right now is because that's what was given for the heat illness prevention plan to be able to do that. But again, remember, when we're taking a look at smoke, we're taking a look at the hazards, we're taking a look at how do we evaluate or measure the hazard. And then we're going to be taking a look at what employee doing what activity outdoor for a period of time. What do we need to do? So what I would recommend is be thinking about a framework. That's why I made a recommendation. Take our generic written workplace safety program and start thinking with some of the key information that the bill is suggesting for the regulatory aspects to key in on as a means to at least have something to go on. But do not, my recommendation is bills are approved to be worked on to have a regulation that follows. I've seen the bill that went in for heat. Not all what was on that bill came out in the regulation.
For a good practice right now, could we follow like California and say from like 150 to the 500 voluntary use is like a best practice? The appendix D, would that be a good, just for that, just for when we get to that 150 and before that 500,
Okay. Me,
I-
just a trainer,
Yeah,
my recommendation is take a look at other plans
okay, that's what I
to
was.
see how other plans, in this case, dealt with that AQI aspect.
Yeah, because then at least, the employer could say like, if it's in the general area, if like all of our work is kind of Nevada or Carson, Reno, Sparks, if the AQI hits 150, we could say, hey, everybody who you're working, you have voluntary use already on the respirator up until if we're seeing any areas that hit 500, then we.
Yeah. I'd be very cautious.
Okay,
Because, yes, EPA has within its chart designations of green, yellow, red, black, whatever it goes down to. And within that EPA chart, it will actually designate certain groups, sensitive groups, and it'll actually have controls. My only hesitation would be is, yes, AQI is going to have a play in the game. But just like when the federal was trying to establish for everyone heat indexes to be considered at the 85-degree level.
Yeah.
If someone was starting to steer around that, and then Nevada comes out with, no, we're not saying anything, all right? But at least for the developers of those plans, if you're going to help a employer develop these plans, there's nothing wrong that can't say, hey, now, California does this with an AQI. But understand, a lot of employers don't understand this. I just went through a whole week from OTI coming out of Chicago, and I've been training, how long, Chris? 8-9 years now? Voluntary use of a respirator. All right, everyone is thinking NH95, right? Voluntary use can also have other respirators. Once it breaks that NH95, then there are specific written requirements to meet with the federal standard to keep individuals safe. Voluntary use is always going to require bottom line paperwork. Every individual is going to have to sign off on Appendix D. A record of that has to be maintained by the employer who is authorizing the voluntary use of, and get this now, a specific respirator. Because if it goes to another type of respirator, medically done. So that's why I'm saying, I like the discussion to get like food for thought, but sometimes we'll get locked in. And some of the initiatives that I've seen certain employers try to do for heat, I mean, taking a lot of time and effort, a third of that effort was for naught.
thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Is there any sort of proposed timeline of like before the end of this year they'll have something? No idea.
And our chief administrative officer for the division was very specific within our podcast. When things go to the legislative council jury, there's no timeline that's being pushed to get this.
They will accept public comment at some point.
And that's what, let me explain that again. Once it comes out, there'll be what's called notification of release. 30 days from that notification is when comments, interested parties, and stakeholders can provide. And that's usually going to be nowadays, well, just like what the other meetings had been in the past. It's going to be by teams, in person, at designated areas. Were we good? Ready? Oh, no. My point of contact information, again, hold my card. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come in and to discuss this. And if anyone wants that letter of completion that you tolerated me for this period of time, she'll send me a roster of those that sent in, send me an email, and I'll get you that letter of completion that will say heat illness prevention updates and discussion for Senate Bill